You ever have one of those moments where the whole world seems to tilt sideways like you just stepped off a spinning ride and nothing feels stable anymore? That's exactly what happened to me last Tuesday morning, and if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I promise you'll understand why I still can't sleep at night. I know you clicked this video because the title alone made your heart skip a beat and you're wondering, how does a routine blood test end with someone's wife in handcuffs? Trust me, I had the same question, and I'm going to walk you through every detail, every strange glance, every word that didn't make sense until it was too late. But I'm telling you right now, this is not one of those slow burn stories you can half listen to while scrolling your phone. This is the kind of true life mystery that gets under your skin, the kind where every little thing you thought you knew about the people you love starts to crack. So if you're here, stay here, because by the time I finish telling you what happened in that hospital lobby, you'll understand why my life will never be the same again. It started like any other day, and I swear that's what makes it worse. The morning sun had that hazy golden light that tricks you into thinking everything is normal. My wife, Emily, was making coffee in the kitchen, humming to herself like she always did when she was trying to hide the fact she hadn't slept well. I didn't think much of it. I'd been married long enough to know when to let her have her space. She reminded me about my annual physical appointment, said she'd come with me just to keep me company, while I got my blood work done. Looking back now, I keep wondering if she had other reasons for wanting to be there. At the time, it felt like nothing more than a sweet gesture. We laughed on the drive over, argued briefly about the best place to get lunch afterward. But here's the thing, you never really know which moments will be the last, normal ones before everything changes. The clinic was busier than usual, the kind of busy that makes you feel anonymous, like just another name on a clipboard. I checked in, handed over my insurance card, sat in one of those hard plastic chairs with the outdated magazines. Emily kept glancing around the room, her eyes darting to the front door every time it opened. I thought maybe she was anxious, but she brushed it off when I asked. When the nurse finally called my name, Emily squeezed my hand and said she'd wait for me in the lobby. Nothing about that should have been strange, except now I can't stop replaying the way her fingers trembled against mine. Inside the lab room, the nurse made small talk while prepping the needle. I've never been squeamish about blood, but for some reason I remember feeling an odd tightness in my chest. She labeled the vial with my name, printed a barcode, and slid it into a small plastic rack. "We'll get these results to your doctor by the end of the day," she said. Normal, routine, unremarkable, except for the faint crackle of a walkie-talkie from somewhere in the hallway outside. At the time, I barely registered it. I stepped back into the lobby, expecting to see Emily scrolling her phone or flipping through a magazine. Instead, I saw two uniformed officers standing just inside the entrance, their hands resting near their belts. Emily was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face pale but her jaw set in a way I recognized all too well, the way she looked when she was bracing for bad news. The moment our eyes met, one of the officers turned to me and asked my name. My stomach dropped because there's a certain tone people use when they already know the answer. Before I could even ask what was going on, the taller officer turned to Emily and said, "Ma'am, we're placing you under arrest. Please stand and keep your hands visible." The words didn't make sense. I laughed nervously, waiting for someone to explain the mix-up. But then Emily looked at me, not with confusion, not with outrage, but with something colder. It was a look I'd never seen before in the woman I'd shared a bed with for 11 years. And in that instant, I realized something that still makes my hands shake. She wasn't surprised. People in the lobby froze. Someone pulled out their phone. The shorter officer began reading Emily her rights, his voice calm but deliberate. My brain was scrambling, trying to catch up. Why my wife? Why here? Why now? My instinct was to step forward, to ask questions, to defend her, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet, that this moment wasn't just about a misunderstanding. They walked her toward the glass doors and I called her name, hoping she'd at least give me something. An explanation, a promise, a hint. Instead, she said something I'll never forget. She turned her head just enough for her voice to carry back to me and whispered, "I told you this day would come." And then she was gone, swallowed up by flashing red and blue lights outside. Now here's the thing, I thought the nightmare would be what happened after that. The police reports, the lawyers, the whispers from neighbors. But no. The real nightmare began the moment I sat back down in that cold plastic chair, staring at the empty space where she'd been, and noticed something sitting on the seat beside me. It wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. And when I opened it, I swear to you, my blood ran colder than it had in my entire life. I remember my hands shaking as I picked it up, not because I knew what it was, but because of the strange, undeniable feeling that whatever it contained was going to change everything. It was a plain manila envelope, the kind you might expect to see in an office, but it had no name, no label, nothing to tell me where it came from. The weight of it was odd, heavier than I expected, but not by much. I almost called after Emily again, thinking maybe she had dropped it on accident, but something deep in my gut told me not to. My instincts, for once, screamed louder than my confusion, and I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket without opening it right there in the lobby. I told myself I'd look at it later, in the car, away from the eyes that seemed to be watching me even as the police cruisers pulled out of the parking lot. You have to understand, Emily and I weren't the kind of couple who kept big secrets from each other. At least I thought we weren't. We'd been married for over a decade, built a life together, fought through hard times, celebrated wins, and still found ways to laugh over burnt toast in the mornings. She wasn't perfect, she had her guarded moments, those times when she'd seem far away in thought, but I never once imagined she was capable of anything that would put her in the back of a squad car. And yet, when I replayed the last few months in my mind, small details started standing out like tiny cracks in glass. She'd been making more phone calls in private lately, cutting them short the moment I walked into the room. She'd started taking the long way home from work, claiming traffic was bad even on nights when I knew it wasn't. She'd asked me just a week ago whether my doctor ever mentioned keeping blood results confidential. At the time, I thought it was just casual conversation. Now it felt like a warning I didn't recognize for what it was. Driving home that day felt like moving through fog. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like it was alive, its contents pulling at my thoughts in ways I couldn't explain. I kept glancing at it at red lights, half expecting it to open itself. But before I even got a chance to tear it open, I realized something that made my skin prickle. Someone in a dark sedan had been following me since I left the clinic. I told myself it was just paranoia, a leftover from the shock of seeing Emily taken away, but every time I turned, they turned too. When I finally pulled into my driveway, they didn't stop, they just slowed down like they were making sure I got home and then kept going. I stood in my living room afterward, blinds half closed, wondering if I'd just imagined it. Here's where things get strange. That night I barely slept. My phone buzzed twice with calls from an unknown number, both of which I ignored. When I finally did open the envelope, I expected papers, maybe something medical, maybe something legal. Instead, I found photographs, at least a dozen of them, each showing Emily in places I didn't recognize. A parking garage. The side of a rural highway. A diner that looked straight out of the 1980s. In some, she was with people I'd never seen before, their faces partially turned away, like they didn't want the camera to catch them. In one, she was holding what looked like another envelope, identical to the one I now had in my hands. I told myself there had to be an explanation, but the truth is, I wasn't sure I wanted one. I started thinking about who could have put that envelope on the chair beside me. Maybe it wasn't Emily's at all. Maybe it was meant for someone else and I just stumbled into something bigger. Or maybe, just maybe, someone wanted me to find it. That's when the paranoia really started to set in. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that almost everyone in our lives could have a reason to want her gone. Her boss, who had been quietly trying to push her out of her job for months. Her estranged sister, who hadn't spoken to her in years but suddenly sent her a vague text the night before the arrest. Even our neighbor, who seemed to know way too much about where we went and when. The thing about suspicion is that once it takes root, it spreads fast. I caught myself questioning every conversation, every glance, every harmless comment. Was Emily's sudden interest in accompanying me to the clinic just coincidence, or had she been waiting for something to happen there? And why would the police arrest her in such a public place unless they wanted someone, maybe me, to see it? The more I thought about it, the less it felt like I'd just been a bystander. It felt like I'd been part of it all along without even realizing it. And here's the kicker. When I went to put the photographs back into the envelope, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tucked into the very back, folded so small it almost escaped notice, was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. No greeting. No signature. Just 7 words in neat, slanted handwriting. Asterisk, we took hers. Yours is next. Asterisk. I must have read that note a dozen times, each time hoping the words would somehow arrange themselves into something less threatening. But they didn't. The more I stared at them, the more my pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't know who they were, what hers meant, or why mine would be next. It could have been meaningless, except deep down I knew it wasn't. I shoved the paper and the photographs back into the envelope, slid it under a loose floorboard in the hallway closet, and tried to tell myself I'd think more clearly in the morning. But when morning came, I found something that made my skin crawl. The envelope was gone. I tore through the closet, ripped open boxes, checked every corner of the room, but it had vanished without a trace. I didn't live with anyone else and I hadn't had visitors. The only person with a key to the house besides Emily was our neighbor Rick. Rick had been helping us ever since we moved in, sometimes too eager to lend a hand, always somehow knowing more about our schedules than he should. I'd never minded it before, but now I couldn't shake the thought that maybe his helpfulness wasn't as innocent as I'd assumed. I went to his door ready to demand answers, but when he opened it, he just smiled like nothing was wrong, leaning against the frame with that calm, unreadable expression that made me want to punch through it. That's when I noticed it. His eyes flicked, just for a second, to my hands as if checking to see if I still had the envelope. When I asked him if he'd been inside my house, his answer came too quickly, too smoothly. "Why would I do that?" he said with a little laugh that felt rehearsed. But before I could push further, he leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. "You should let this go. It's bigger than you think." That stopped me cold. I hadn't told him a single detail about the arrest, about the photos, about the note. Yet somehow he knew enough to tell me to stop digging. The problem was I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. Because that night, while I was sitting in the kitchen, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. It said, "Meet me at the diner on 8th. Midnight. Come alone." Attached was a grainy image of Emily, taken from what looked like the security camera inside the clinic lobby, at the exact moment the officer stood beside her. It wasn't just any still frame either. In this one, Emily wasn't looking at the cops. She was looking past them, straight into the camera, and smiling. I almost didn't go. Everything in me said it was a setup. But the thought of ignoring it, of missing my one chance to get answers, was worse than the fear of walking into a trap. The diner was nearly empty when I got there, the kind of place that smells like burnt coffee and stale sugar packets. A woman sat in the back booth, her face half hidden by the shadow of the hanging light. She looked up when I approached, and I realized I recognized her, not from my own life but from one of the photographs in the envelope. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Emily's been lying to you for years," she said quietly, leaning forward so no one else could hear. "And if you keep looking for the truth, you'll end up exactly where she is, or worse." I wanted to demand details, but before I could, she slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is on here. But you can't trust anyone, not the police, not your friends, not even," she trailed off, her eyes darting to the diner's front door. I turned to see who she was looking at, and my stomach flipped. Rick was standing there, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, his expression unreadable. When I turned back to the woman, she was gone. The booth was empty, the flash drive still on the table. Rick started walking toward me, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. And then my phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This one had no words, just a single image, my own face taken through the kitchen window of my house. Last night. Rick's presence in that diner should have been enough to send me out the back door and into the night, but something about the way he just stood there, calm, steady, like he'd been expecting me, froze me in place. I slid the flash drive into my pocket without breaking eye contact. He didn't even glance at the table. Instead, he motioned toward the door, a subtle tilt of his head that seemed more like a command than a suggestion. I didn't follow him. I waited, half expecting him to come over, but he simply stepped outside, disappearing into the cool night air as if he'd accomplished exactly what he came for. I didn't realize until later that maybe the point wasn't to speak to me at all. Maybe it was just to let me know he knew where I was and who I was meeting. When I finally got home, the first thing I did was lock every door and window. I didn't even turn on the lights. The house felt too exposed, like anyone could be watching from the street. I powered up my laptop and plugged in the flash drive, but before I could open anything, my phone rang. It was my sister Claire. We're not especially close, but she sounded rattled in a way I'd never heard before. She told me she'd just received a manila envelope in the mail, no return address, no name, inside of which was a single photograph of me sitting in the clinic lobby that day, staring at the spot where Emily had been. On the back, in the same slanted handwriting as the note I'd found, were the words, "Ask him what happened in 09. That date meant nothing to me at first, but the way she said it, hesitant, almost afraid, made me feel like maybe it should. Claire wouldn't explain how she got the envelope or why she hadn't called me sooner. She just kept insisting I leave it alone, that some things are better left buried. But I could hear it in her voice, she knew more than she was willing to say. And if someone was sending her the same kind of cryptic messages I'd been getting, then whatever this was had spread beyond me and Emily. The urge to check the flash drive was almost unbearable, but before I could click the first file, my screen went black. I thought maybe the laptop had died, but when I tried to power it back on, it wouldn't respond. Not even a flicker. I unplugged it, plugged it back in, pressed the power button over and over, but nothing. It was as if the moment I'd inserted that drive, something, or someone, had killed it remotely. The worst part? The flash drive was gone from the desk. I was alone in the locked house, yet somehow in the span of a few minutes, someone had been close enough to take it without me hearing a sound. That night, sleep wasn't even an option. I sat at the kitchen table going over every detail in my head. The photos, the note, the missing envelope, the text messages, and now Claire's mysterious warning. Each piece made less sense the more I tried to fit them together. I kept circling back to that date, 2009, wondering if it tied to Emily, to me, to something we'd both forgotten, or buried. And that's when another thought hit me. What if Emily's arrest wasn't about something she'd done recently, but about something from years ago? Something we'd both been a part of without even realizing it. Just after 3 in the morning, my phone lit up again with another unknown number. This time it was a video file. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. The footage was grainy, shot from what looked like a hidden camera. At first, I didn't recognize the setting, but then I realized it was our old apartment from over a decade ago. The frame showed a much younger me sitting at our kitchen table with Emily standing behind me, her hand resting on my shoulder. The video had no sound, but I could see Emily's mouth moving, leaning down to whisper something in my ear. And then, in the reflection of the darkened window, I saw a third figure standing in the hallway. The video cut off abruptly before I could make out their face, but my stomach twisted as I realized something was off. This wasn't a random recording. Whoever sent it had been in that apartment with us, close enough to capture a moment I didn't even remember happening. And now they wanted me to know they'd been there. I was still processing that when a notification popped up on my phone. A text from Claire, sent just seconds ago. *, they're not after Emily anymore. They're after you, *. I sat there staring at Claire's text, my hands trembling in a way I couldn't control. It wasn't just the words, it was the timing, the fact that she had sent it seconds after I'd received that video. She had to know something, maybe even more than she was telling me, and the idea that my own sister might be tangled up in whatever this was made the walls around me feel like they were closing in. I started typing a reply, asking her where she was and if she was safe, but before I could hit send, the screen flashed, message failed. I tried calling her, but the line went straight to voicemail. I called again and again with the same result. It was like she had disappeared between one breath and the next. My chest tightened, the kind of tightness that isn't about panic, it's about knowing deep in your gut that something bad has already happened. I couldn't stay in the house anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow on the walls felt like someone was just out of sight, watching. I grabbed my jacket, stepped outside into the cold night and froze. Parked across the street, half in shadow, was the same dark sedan I'd noticed after leaving the clinic. This time there was no pretending it was a coincidence. The engine was idling, the faint white puff of exhaust visible in the streetlight. I couldn't see the driver, but I could feel their eyes on me, tracking every movement. My instinct screamed at me to run back inside, lock the door and pretend I hadn't seen it, but a louder, more dangerous thought pushed through. If I did that, I'd never know how close they were willing to get. I walked down the driveway slowly, forcing myself to look casual, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The sedan didn't move at first. But when I reached the sidewalk, it eased forward, rolling at the same pace I walked. I turned the corner onto a quieter street and it followed. My mind was running through every possibility. Was it the police, some private investigator, someone tied to Emily, or something worse? The streetlights here were farther apart, leaving long stretches of darkness between them, and with each step, I felt more exposed. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed again. No number this time, just a notification from an encrypted messaging app one didn't remember installing. The message was short: "You're walking the wrong way." I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. Whoever was in that car wasn't just following me, they were communicating with me in real time. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the sedan creeping closer, its headlights dimmed. That was the moment it hit me with full force. This wasn't about Emily anymore. I was the one being hunted now. I bolted. My feet pounded the pavement, my lungs burning in the cold air. I cut down an alley between two houses, not caring about the noise, just wanting to break their line of sight. I could hear the hum of the engine somewhere behind me, faint but steady, like a predator circling. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks from my house, crouched behind a dumpster, my whole body shaking. That's when I realized my phone was gone. I must have dropped it, or maybe it had been taken, somewhere along the way. As I caught my breath, I became aware of something else. I wasn't alone in that alley. There was the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, coming closer from the opposite end. A figure emerged from the shadows, and at first I thought it was Rick. But then I saw the flash of something metallic in their hand, glinting under the dim light. They stopped a few feet away, and in a voice so calm it made my skin crawl. They said, "You've already seen too much. Now you need to choose how this ends." It was after midnight when I finally pulled into the driveway, my hands still trembling from the feeling that I'd been watched all evening. I couldn't shake the image of the same black SUV that had tailed me from the grocery store, always hanging just far enough back to make me question if it was real or just paranoia taking hold. The house looked the same from the outside, quiet, dark, safe, but the moment I stepped through the front door the air felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. There was an envelope sitting dead center on the kitchen table, one that hadn't been there when I left earlier. My name was written on it in the same jagged handwriting from the first note I received, the one that had started all of this. But when I opened it, expecting another vague warning or cryptic clue, what I found made my knees weaken. It was a single Polaroid photograph of me taken through my bedroom window, dated only 2 hours earlier. That was the moment everything shifted. Up until then, the messages, the coincidences, the strange disappearances, they had all felt like a puzzle to solve, a tangled thread to follow. But this was different. This was someone telling me they had been close enough to touch me while I slept, close enough to breathe the same air. My chest tightened and I scanned the room, convinced someone was still inside the house. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, it buzzed in my hand with a new text from an unknown number: "You're trusting the wrong person." My first instinct was to think of strangers, faceless threats. But then my mind went somewhere far more dangerous. I thought of the people I actually trusted, the ones who had been by my side through all of this. I called my sister first, the one person who had been my lifeline lately, but her phone rang out without an answer. That was strange in itself. She never let it go past the first ring if she saw my name. Then I checked my voicemail and my stomach sank. There was a new message from her, but it wasn't her voice I heard. It was a man's, low and deliberate, whispering, "You think she's safe. She's not. Neither are you." I didn't recognize the voice, but something about the tone felt rehearsed, as if he knew I'd play it back again and again, dissecting every breath. My mind flashed through every conversation I'd had, every word exchanged over the past few days, and I realized there were things I had missed. Slip-ups in stories, strange hesitations, eyes that darted away when I asked the wrong questions. Then came the detail that made me feel truly unmoored: the handwriting on the envelope. I had been so focused on the message that I hadn't noticed it was identical to the way my late father used to write my name. He'd been gone for years, buried in a cemetery 2 states away. At least, that's what I'd always believed. Now, looking at those jagged letters, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Maybe someone had learned to mimic it. Maybe it was a cruel trick. Or maybe, God help me, he was still out there. And if that was true, then everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the danger I was in was about to be rewritten completely. This wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was a trap, and I had been walking straight into it. It was the kind of night where even the shadows seemed to be listening. I sat in my car outside the dimly lit diner, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, replaying the last hour over and over like some kind of cruel highlight reel. The text message from the unknown number was still open on my phone, burning in my mind. Asterisk, if you want the truth, meet me alone. And don't tell anyone you're coming. Asterisk, no name, no number I could trace, just the kind of command that digs under your skin and makes every instinct scream trap. And yet, here I was, because the alternative, living without answers, felt worse. Inside, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint smell of stale coffee did nothing to settle my nerves. My eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting someone I knew to walk in and expose me. That's when I saw him, someone I did know. But he wasn't supposed to be here. Not after what I'd learned. It was Tom. My neighbor. The guy who mowed my lawn when I was sick last spring. The guy who brought over beer for the football game last Thanksgiving. But now, he was sitting in the corner booth, facing away from the street, talking in low tones to a man I didn't recognize, someone with a face I was sure I'd remember if I'd ever seen it before. There was something deliberate about their conversation, the way Tom leaned in too close, the way the stranger kept sliding something across the table. At first, I thought it was a folded napkin, until the corner slipped open just enough for me to see the glint of a photograph inside. My stomach twisted when I realized it wasn't just any photograph, it was me. A candid shot taken from a distance sometime in the past week. I'd been followed. Every instinct told me to leave, but as I shifted in my seat, Tom's gaze lifted and locked on mine. His face didn't change, no surprise, no guilt, just that same calm neighborly expression he'd always worn. Only now it felt like a mask. He excused himself from the table, walked straight to my booth, and slid into the seat across from me as if we'd planned to meet. "You're in over your head," he said quietly, his voice steady but urgent. "And you're asking questions about things you don't understand." I tried to demand answers, but he cut me off with a look that froze me in place. Then he gave me a choice, one so impossible it left me breathless. "If you keep digging, you won't just put yourself in danger, you'll put them in danger." He didn't have to say who them was. I knew. My family. I wanted to tell him I'd walk away, that I'd drop it all and go back to pretending life was normal. But the truth was I couldn't, not after everything that had happened. He must have seen the stubbornness in my eyes because he leaned closer and whispered something that made the blood drain from my face. "If you choose the truth, you won't like what you find. And once you know, there's no going back." My pulse thundered in my ears, and I realized that every second I hesitated, the line between safety and disaster was disappearing. I was already too far gone. I had to decide, protect the people I loved or finally uncover the truth that had been haunting me. Either way, I knew that tonight something was going to break. It was like the air itself had turned against me, pressing in, making every breath heavier than the last, because suddenly the pieces that had been scattered and meaningless began to click together, and the picture they formed wasn't just dangerous, it was massive. This wasn't about one lie or one betrayal. This was a network, a web of people, places, and events I'd been blindly walking through my whole life without realizing they were all connected. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears as I thought back to every conversation, every seemingly harmless moment, and realized that the people who had been helping me were never really on my side. The cop who had given me the case file in secret? He was working for them. The neighbor who swore she saw something suspicious that night? She was planted there, feeding me exactly the narrative they wanted. Even my brother, the one person I thought I could trust without question, had been pulling strings in the background. I wanted to scream at myself for not seeing it sooner, but the truth was, no one could have, because they had built this story so carefully, so convincingly, that I was living in their reality without even knowing it. And now I understood the real danger. It wasn't just me they were after. This conspiracy stretched across towns, across state lines, touching people who didn't even realize they were pawns in a much larger game. The threats I had been receiving weren't warnings to stop. They were taunts, letting me know they were in control and that I was already too deep to back out. My phone buzzed with a message, and when I opened it, the world seemed to tilt sideways. It was a live video feed of someone I loved, someone who had nothing to do with any of this, sitting in a dimly lit room with their hands tied. The voice that came through the speaker wasn't angry, it was calm, steady, and cold. "Walk away and they live. Keep digging and you'll watch them disappear forever." My throat went dry, and for a moment I couldn't think, couldn't move, because the choice was too heavy, too impossible. Every instinct told me to protect them, to abandon this madness and take the deal, but another part of me, the part that had seen just how deep this rot went, knew that walking away wouldn't save anyone. They'd keep going, keep destroying lives until someone stopped them. And if I didn't do it, no one else would. The room seemed to shrink around me as I realized the clock was already ticking, and if I didn't make my move now, everything I'd uncovered would disappear, buried under the weight of their lies. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew that if I took the next step, there was no way back, no second chance, no safety. This wasn't about truth anymore, it was survival, and I was standing on the edge, one choice away from losing everything. The night air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that seemed to press against the skin, making every breath harder to take. I could feel the weight of everything that had led me here, the cryptic warnings, the whispered threats, the faces of people I thought I knew but didn't. The abandoned warehouse loomed ahead like something out of a nightmare, its rusted metal siding groaning in the wind, the flicker of a single dying bulb above the entrance casting long, jittering shadows. Every instinct told me to turn back, to walk away while I still had the chance, but that wasn't an option anymore. Too many lies had piled up, too many people had been hurt, and the truth was so close I could feel it burning in my chest. Inside those walls was the person who had pulled the strings from the start, the one who had made me question my sanity, my memories, and even my own family. My heartbeat was so loud it almost drowned out the creak of the door as I pushed it open and stepped into the darkness. The air inside was damp and smelled faintly of mold and gasoline, and my eyes strained against the dim light until I saw movement. A figure stepping out from the shadows with the slow confidence of someone who had been waiting. And when I saw their face, my stomach dropped so hard it felt like the floor had fallen away. It wasn't some stranger. It was the person I had trusted the most through all of this, the one who had sworn they were on my side. The smirk they wore now was nothing like the expressions I remembered. It was cold, deliberate, almost rehearsed. "I told you to stop digging, they said, their voice calm in a way that made my skin crawl. My mind scrambled for reasons, excuses, anything that would explain why the one person I thought I could trust had been feeding me just enough truth to keep me moving in the direction they wanted. The pieces clicked together all at once. The accidental leads, the conveniently timed appearances, the way certain people had always seemed to be one step ahead of me. I had never been finding the truth, I had been led to it step by step like a lamb to slaughter. Behind them I saw a desk littered with files, photographs, and a single open laptop streaming live security footage from places I knew well. My street, my kitchen, my child's school. They had been watching me for months, maybe longer. My hands clenched so tightly I could feel my nails dig into my palms, but anger wasn't enough to drown out the fear. You still have a choice, they said, taking a step closer. You can walk away now and keep your life exactly as it is, or you can push this any further and lose everything. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and impossible to ignore. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but somewhere deep down, I knew that leaving now would mean living in their shadow forever. So I took another step forward instead. That's when I saw it, a single manila folder at the edge of the desk with my name scrawled across the front in thick black marker. My hands trembled as I reached for it, but before I could open it, they grabbed my wrist hard enough to make my bones ache. The struggle wasn't cinematic. It was ugly, desperate, the kind of fight where survival meant more than winning. We crashed into the desk, sending papers flying like startled birds, and the laptop clattered to the ground with a sickening crack. In the chaos, the folder spilled open and what fell out made my blood run cold. It wasn't just evidence about me, it was a network. Names, addresses, photographs of dozens of people, some I knew and others I didn't, all tied together in ways that made my head spin. This wasn't just about me. This was about something massive, a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined, one that had been quietly manipulating lives, pulling strings, and erasing anyone who got too close. I barely had time to process it before they slammed me against the wall, their breath hot against my ear. You don't know what you've started, they hissed, their voice shaking for the first time. But then, just as quickly, their grip loosened, their eyes darted toward the far side of the room, because someone else was here. The second figure stepped out of the darkness and my entire world shifted again. It was someone I hadn't seen in years, someone I thought was gone for good, holding something in their hands that gleamed under the flickering light. The look they gave me wasn't one of reunion, it was a warning. And in that single frozen moment, I realized that whatever choice I thought I had to make wasn't mine anymore. The real game had just begun, and I was standing in the middle of it with no way to tell which side was the lesser evil. By the time the dust had settled and the sirens faded into the night, I found myself standing in the middle of a living room that no longer felt like my own. The walls still held the photographs, the furniture was still in place, but everything else had shifted, like the world had been tilted slightly off its axis, and I would never be able to set it right again. I had pieced together every thread, uncovered every lie, and seen the faces behind the masks, and the truth was both liberating and devastating. The conspiracy hadn't just been about me, it had swallowed entire lives, manipulated memories, and turned trust into a weapon. People I'd once shared meals with, people who had held my child, had been part of something that existed in plain sight yet thrived in shadows. Even as the authorities took statements and packed away boxes of evidence, I knew that justice was only a word we liked to believe in, not a guarantee. The leaders of it all were still out there, and the unsettling part was realizing that maybe they always would be. In the days that followed, life tried to resume its rhythm. The morning coffee still brewed, the neighborhood kids still played in the street, and the same delivery guy still dropped packages at the door, as though none of it had happened. But the way I looked at people had changed forever. Every smile carried a second meaning, every coincidence felt like a carefully placed move in a game I was still playing without knowing all the rules. I found myself keeping the blinds open at night, not because I wanted to see outside but because I wanted anyone watching to know that I wasn't hiding anymore. My daughter slept soundly again, her nightmares fading, though sometimes I caught her staring out the window with a look that told me she understood far more than I wanted her to. There were no more strange calls, no more unmarked envelopes, yet a part of me still woke at 3 a.m., listening for a sound I couldn't name. It wasn't until weeks later, when the air was heavy with summer rain, that I found the last piece of the puzzle, if you could even call it that. I was cleaning out a drawer in the study when I discovered a small, sealed envelope with no return address. My name was written in handwriting I recognized but couldn't place, and inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of my family taken years ago, long before any of this began, but standing in the background, blurry, almost easy to miss, was the man I had confronted the night everything came apart. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at us. And on the back, written in the same neat handwriting, was a single line. Asterisk, this was never just about you. Asterisk, my hands trembled, but I didn't show anyone. I tucked it away in a place only I knew about, not because I was afraid but because some truths aren't meant to be shared, at least not yet. And as the thunder rolled outside, I realized that the story I thought had ended was only the first chapter in something far bigger than I could imagine.